Hello, I'm Hugh Deeming. I'm a research consultant with a particular interest in civil protection, emergency management, and resilience research. As such, I was commissioned by DfT and the local government technical advisors group, LG-TAG, to carry out a review of highway sector learning from extreme weather events during the period of 2015 to 2020. However, before I talk about my review, it's worth setting a bit of context and also remembering that extreme events didn't stop in 2020. Just for example, in 2021, we had the July the 12th storm in London, which flooded 1,000 properties, 9 underground stations, and many businesses. This is the devastation of the Germany-Belgium floods in 2021. But what's key here is that this was the same storm that had just flooded London. The storm moved 400 miles east, stalled, and proceeded to kill over 200 people and cause a minimum of 10 billion euros in damage. The same storm impacting communities that are the same distance from London as Edinburgh is. This was a catastrophe for them and a very near miss for us. The next was Storm Arwen, 8 million trees blown over, with many of them blocking roads and taking out power infrastructure as they fell. The lessons from Storm Arwen, identified by BEIS, included the importance of communication between responders, including between power companies and highway authorities, who have a collaborative role in getting road access back open so power supplies can be reconnected. Another big one, this is Vancouver, British Columbia, in November 2021. Why do I show this? Because the British Columbia floods of 21 were caused by a phenomenon called an atmospheric river. These are ribbon-like storm fronts that are generated by interactions between the sea surface and the atmosphere and can produce huge amounts of precipitation as rainfall and snow. This map is useful because it shows how similar the sea surface temperature conditions are in the Pacific next to British Columbia and in the Atlantic next to the UK. Storm Desmond in 2015 and Storm Dennis in 2020 were both atmospheric river events, so we know we are exposed to this intensifying hazard type. At the start of 2022, we then had Storms Dudley, Eunice and Franklin. These were the first 3 named storms to transit the UK within a 7-day period. They came with 1 in 200-year wind strengths and flooding, and they caused 4 deaths. Then, the heatwave of summer 2022, which melted roads and highway infrastructure and resulted in London Fire Brigade's busiest day since World War II. This event was unprecedented, but as the global temperature continues to trend upward, such heatwaves will inevitably become more frequent. Here we see Somerset flooding in imagery reminiscent of 2007, yet this photograph was taken in January 2023. These extreme events are not going away. Why is this? The one increasingly strident Cassandra message for me here, in that she was fated with the power of prophecy but was destined never to be believed, is our changing climate. These are Reading University's climate stripes, developed by Professor Ed Hawkins. As you may be aware, these stripes illustrate the increasing global average temperature between 1850 and 2022. The yellow line is placed at 1975 because it was then that subsequent studies have identified that the signal of human influence had diverged from the noise of natural climate variability. These increasing temperatures after this point are effectively down to us. Looking at it a slightly different way, this upward trend of temperature increase is not going to slow or stop until we achieve net zero or even negative zero. My Cassandra feeling is driven by the fact that not only will an increasing temperature lead to more intense heat waves, but for every degree of warming, our atmosphere can hold an additional 7% water vapor content. Our floods too are going to get worse. So what does this mean? It means that we can't just focus on decarbonisation. We need to build our resilience by adapting to get ahead of our future challenges. To my review, shortly. But first, what was important for me when I was commissioned to write this report, because I was coming in as an outsider, was to understand what lessons the sector had already learned from its experience of managing extreme events. So firstly, there was the pit review following the flooding in 2007. This review, published in 2008, a decade and a half ago, stated the importance of all infrastructure projects needing to focus on both climate change mitigation, including decarbonisation, and adaptation, including asset resilience. Of course, climate being climate, we then had severe winters of 2009 and 10. This led to the Quarmby Review, which gave us the National Winter Service Research Group, the NWSRG, and the publication of its Practical Winter Service Guidelines. Quarmby also proposed that cross-boundary mutual aid contingencies should be seen as fundamental to highways winter management, so he promoted working together across boundaries to keep networks running. But he also acknowledged that winter service should be seen as an integral part of general resilience planning. He made it clear that he knew that winter weather wasn't the only challenge the sector faced. You'll see a pattern emerging here. We then had the 2013-14 floods, followed by the Brown Review of Transport Sector Resilience. The Brown Review gave us our resilient networks, the parts of our network that, due to their lifeline importance, we manage more proactively than other parts. Brown also stated the importance of exercising. I also emphasise this because for me this doesn't simply mean strategic level navel gazing over exercise injects like the bridge at Anytown has collapsed. It actually underlines the importance of having explicit and testable highways-focused exercise aims and objectives. For example, how reliable are your mutual aid arrangements in drawing bridge inspection capabilities when you need them? 2013-14 was followed by Storm Desmond, Eva and Frank in 2015, which brought devastating impacts to northern England and southern Scotland. After these storms, Oliver Letwin led the National Flood Resilience Review, which included input from the Met Office. The Met Office modelling suggested that we should start to develop contingencies for a future where there is a risk of storms of Storm Desmond intensity plus 30%. What does that look like? This graph shows 3 levels of rainfall for Cumbria. The 1971 to 2000 average on the left, Storm Desmond's 333mm average in the middle, and Storm Desmond plus 30% on the right. These quantities won't map directly across your areas, but the image should be understood as illustrating the principle that Storm Desmond plus 30% can be equated to 3 times your historic average maximum. You're probably thinking that very few elements of your currently in place infrastructure would be able to cope with such rainfall intensity undamaged. Next, we had the UK Climate Change Risk Assessment, CCRA3. This is interesting because its analysis of network infrastructure focused on projecting climate change impacts on the rail network and the strategic road network. They didn't really look at the local roads network. That's a bit of a black hole in the analysis, and therefore in our understanding. Yet, CCRA3 stated, alarmingly, new evidence shows that the gap between the level of risk we face and the level of adaptation underway has widened. Adaptation action has failed to keep pace with the worsening reality of climate risk. It seems I'm not the only Cassandra. These are just 3 examples of singularly significant impacts we've suffered. Cogden Bridge in North Yorkshire, a £3 million repair, the A591, the main arterial route through Cumbria, and Tadcaster Bridge, a bottleneck asset, whose collapse also disrupted many pieces of aligned infrastructure, including the emergency services airwave communication system. So finally, to my report. I focused my review on looking at the sector's resilience to extreme weather. So the first point to cover is, what do I mean by resilience? Luckily, in late 2022, the government published its National Resilience Framework. This defines resilience as an ability to withstand or quickly recover from a difficult situation, but also to get ahead of those risks and tackle challenges before they manifest. So, an ability to resist and or bounce back from stressors, but also an ability to get ahead of risks and mitigate their effects proactively. This is a useful definition, but having now worked with the highway sector for a few years, I think it's useful to split the concept down into a set of domains. First, robustness. Here, resilience can be understood as, for example, flood defences built to a high standard of protection. But not everything can be robust to all hazards, because over-engineering is costly and it can have unintended consequences. For example, in respect to flooding, defending one location to a high standard can expose another location downstream to increased risk. Therefore, we need to think about how we can invest in these other types of resilience. So, a system's reliability to work under a variety of conditions. How reliable is your gritter fleet? But also, how reliable are your duty rotas and call-out procedures in ensuring you can get the right people and the right capabilities in place when you need them? Next, redundancy. An easy one for highways. Do you know your safe diversion routes around likely impacted assets and key facilities? Do you know which of your communities have only one access or egress route with no redundancy? Do you have contingencies to deal with that if that route is ever disrupted? But also in this domain are the fallback options. For example, multi-role vehicles in your fleet could fall into this category, as they are able to provide redundancy across a range of capabilities. Resourcefulness. This has two components. The first is how much in terms of kit, skills and resources have you got, or how much could you get access to, for example by reaching back into your supply chains. The second aspect of resourcefulness is your ability to unleash the potential of quick thinking and out-of-the-box thinking. I saw really good examples of this in relation to storms Desmond and Eva, including the then innovative use of sonar technology to examine damaged bridges. Rapidity. What are your contingencies, your plans, for making things safe as quickly as you can? Two useful examples of rapidity I would suggest are Cumbria's getting the Maybe Bridge in place in Pooley Bridge after Storm Desmond, and Network Rail's contingencies for getting its signals equipment at Cowley Bridge Junction, a flooding hotspot near Exeter, operational as soon as floodwaters recede. Finally, recovery. Are you able to initiate clear recovery program management to effectively build back better? This is a concept which I think is best understood as building back so as not to reproduce the exact same vulnerabilities in your assets and network that led to the disruption in the first place. So taking all this experience and learning into account and using the lens of the 6 resilience domains, what did my review find? I made 28 recommendations and observations. These range from the success of the project management approach taken to recovering Cumbria's devastated infrastructure following Storm Desmond to the now ubiquitous presence of social media, meaning that there is an increasing need for highway authorities to develop communication strategies that reflect social media's value in supporting incident managers' situational awareness. I found a lot of good practice, but overall I think 3 recommendations stand out. First is the importance of highways teams, managers and directors all being suitably qualified, experienced and empowered to manage emergencies affecting their networks as a leading participant in a multi-agency response. This involves competency development through training and exercising. Second, building on Quarmby's recommendation in respect to the importance of building mutual aid relationships, it is obvious to me that mutual aid can no longer be simply understood as authorities sharing resources across their borders. Extreme events may be affecting your neighbouring authorities equally as much as they are affecting you. Therefore, we need to be developing highways mutual aid and supply chain contingencies at regional and national scales. You need to know, if you are calling for help, there are processes in place to get the right capabilities to you efficiently from wherever they are in the country. And thirdly, is the importance of consistent rapid impact assessment. I was told many times that without a consistent approach to rapid impact assessment, it was impossible to get a clear understanding of who is being impacted the most, who requires what assistance, and who is best placed to most effectively help. Consistent impact assessments are needed to create shared situational awareness at up to national scale and to inform fair repair programming and funding priorities. Going back to the first recommendation, qualifications and experience, I think it's worth highlighting a particular aspect of highways management during emergencies that adds an impetus to your ability to engage fully with multi-agency emergency management. Here you see the traditional 6-phase model of emergency management. Starting with 1, you anticipate and scan the horizon for possible risks. You then assess the risks and set priorities for how you can manage them. You prevent what you can, for example by building in reliability, robustness and redundancy. You prepare in case you need to mobilize, and if nothing happens, you validate, learn and cycle back through the first phases. If something happens, then you respond rapidly by implementing your plans and/or by being resourceful. And when you finish, you go into recovery, building back better and aligning to a new normal. But what I found during my review was that highways teams have a key role in a separate phase that isn't formally recognised. They are incredibly important when it comes to stabilising a situation. The importance of the stabilisation phase emerged for me directly out of Cumbria's Storm Desmond experience. The recovery term was inappropriate in terms of public perceptions, when impassable bridges and roads blocked for days and weeks were not regarded as visible evidence of recovery. In such circumstances, stabilising assets ensures things are safe whilst also allowing difficult discussions to be held regarding the importance of scheduling repair tasks using risk-based approaches. In effect, it helps you to better explain why some assets are being repaired more quickly than others. For example, the public will understand why a destroyed bridge won't be a priority if there is another bridge 300 metres downstream, and whilst you are working to reconnect other communities who are completely cut off from their services. I think I've referred to lifelines a couple of times, so I should explain what I mean. During my interviews for the report, I kept being told that highways provided an everybody, everyday service. That's catchy, but I never thought this was enough to explain their demonstrated importance. So when in 2019 the United States Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, published its Community Lifeline Toolkit, I got it. Here they laid out the importance of energy in terms of power and fuel supplies, communication equipment and facilities. We all need to be able to get to hospital and to our doctor's surgery. Our police and fire services need to be able to get around, and we all need access to shops and services, and they need to be resupplied. And we need to be able to keep control of hazardous materials. And for all this, we need effective transportation. And for this reason, local roads became for me an example of a crucially important lifeline infrastructure. FEMA says, lifelines are the most fundamental services in a community that, when stabilised, enable all other aspects of society to function. Lifelines are the integrated network of assets, services and capabilities that are used day to day to support the recurring needs of the community. Thinking back to Tadcaster Bridge, local roads host, carry or connect everything else. So when disrupted, decisive intervention is required to stabilise the incident. In case you don't see it, the lifeline concept actively pushes highways teams toward the front end of delivering emergency response. Are you and your teams suitably qualified, experienced, empowered and equipped to meet this challenge? So in summary, the sector's traditional focus on extreme weather, as meaning snow and ice, is in marked contrast to the wider impacts most councils are now witnessing. Levels of preparedness and response can be seen as based around good teams reacting as best they can. But is that enough? I believe that highway networks should now be regarded and discussed as primary lifeline infrastructure. I also see that highways personnel need to be empowered as key partners in collaborative integrated emergency management. Consistent rapid impact assessment is needed to deliver shared situational awareness of highway impacts during major incidents. The sector's approach to emergency management needs to be underpinned by redefined risk-based approaches to post-incident network recovery. Risk-based approaches need to mature from a focus on pothole characteristics to being understood as an essential contingency across all phases of effective emergency management. Finally, what I believe my research has underlined is the pressing need for discussions at local, regional and national levels, and a radical acceptance within the whole sector, including public entities and private sector supply chains, that instead of perfunctorily planning for if we are impacted by extreme events, we need to be explicitly and collaboratively planning and building contingencies for when we are.